Hello. All right. I see folks. I want to say piling in, but piling in makes it sound like people are falling on each other. It just sounds more legit. Hello, everyone. I have 6:57 Eastern, so we'll give everybody like 3 more minutes, and then we'll get started and talk all things NP faculty. Dun, dun, dun.
I'm going to step away and get that water bottle.
Yes, go do that. Go do that. And for anyone who is getting on just now, hey, Teresa. I'd love to. Okay, my Siri wants to be a part of this conversation. Teresa, suddenly. Anyone who's coming on, drop a hello in the chat. Let us know where you're joining us from. I'm in South Florida. Dr. Miller's in Vegas. Where's everybody? '80-degree Vegas, I should add.
It'll go back to the 90s next week, but right now we're having a cold front.
Yeah. Oh boy. Fort Myers. Oh, yay, Florida. Oh, Phoenix, Arizona. Nice. West Coast. Love it. Faculty at Arizona State University. Okay, cool. That's nice. Awesome. We'll give everybody 1 more minute and then we'll get going. I like Arizona. I'll be there in December.
I like Arizona too. I have, since we're not officially started, I'll show you. Can you see this bracelet?
Yes.
I got it in Scottsdale in like 1996.
Really?
At just old Scottsdale, one of those little silver shops in Old Town.
Yes. Yes.
And there's a hair clip that matches it. This is almost 30 years old.
That's wild.
And I still wear it all the time. I've gone through so many husbands and jobs and everything else in those 30 years, but I still have my bracelet and my hair clip. I've gone through a few of them. All good guys. Awesome guys.
Yeah,
but
Laura.
The bracelet endures.
Laura said it's a really good time to come in Arizona in December because it's hot in summer. That's for sure. That's for sure. Oh, awesome. She grew up in Scottsdale. Awesome.
Is the grapevine still there? Oh, we're starting. Okay.
No, you're fine. It's more important. Talking about jewelry is more important than what's happening.
Well, the grapevine is a restaurant, like right there in Old Town, like a karaoke. They have great stir fry.
Nice.
They did. I mean, it's been a while.
Oh, it's still there, so I have to check it out. Put it on the list. Oh,
in December.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Well, welcome everybody. Thank you for joining us. Wherever you're joining us from, I appreciate it. I just want to do a little quick housekeeping. Joanna's our moderator. She just went ahead and dropped in some just housekeeping bits in the chat. But at any point in time, if anybody has questions, feel free to drop them in the chat, drop them in the Q&A. I'll be checking that along the way as we're talking. And then during the last 15 minutes, 10-15 minutes, we'll go through all the questions just to make sure that, we answered everything for folks. So again, appreciate you joining. I'm Jonna Emil. I'll be your host for this. And joining me is Dr. Sally Miller. I feel like I dream this line. And joining me is Dr. Sally Miller. We do so much work today together.
Do you dream or nightmare that line?
Oh. Thank you for joining me, Dr. Miller. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you.
Good, good. Okay, so we're going to get right into it. We're going to talk about transitioning to faculty, right? Like, what is that experience for any NPs who either are working in faculty right now in that type of role? We'll get into that. NPs that are maybe working a clinical role and thinking about getting into faculty, academia and changing that up. That's a very different experience, I imagine. I will tell you, for me, as an RN, going from clinical to the academic world was a very different experience. Having to teach patients is a lot different than having to teach different of nursing. So Dr. Miller, you're faculty for us, like for FHEA, but you're faculty or have been faculty for universities and taught students. Is that right?
Oh, I have been a full-time faculty member since 1995 or 96.
Wow. So just a small amount of time you've done this.
Yeah, it's a few years.
Okay, so you do a lot. Like you are definitely one of our faculty members that has a lot of notches on her belt. So why faculty? Why was that something that you even decided you wanted to do?
I swear, almost everything I have done professionally from the very beginning, someone has nudged me into. Like I was very fortunate to have good mentors really from the very beginning. I mean, honest to goodness, I became a nurse because I was a single mom and I had just got out of the Marine Corps and I really didn't have my job in the Marine Corps was signals intelligence. You needed a top secret security clearance to do what I did.
Oh my
So
gosh.
when I was discharged, there was no job I could roll into, as a newly discharged from the armed forces. So I had to start from scratch. I was a single mom. I was young. I had no real education other than my signals intelligence experience. And at the time, this was 1986 or something like that. There was an enormous nursing shortage. And I mean, it was one of those things that you could just go into right out of school. So listen, I wish I could claim a very noble, selfless humanitarian motivation for being a nurse, but I can't. I needed something that I knew I could roll right into a job and, be paid a decent salary. So I went into nursing for that reason. Fortunately, I liked it, but I went into it for that reason. And then from the very beginning, like even it was like a associate's degree or bachelor's degree program. The bachelor's degree let me start first. So went there,
You went.
and then yeah, my basic degree was a BSN, and one of my faculty member there, Dr. Mary Shao, she was BSN faculty when I was at Rutgers, and she really propelled me into graduate school, into my first faculty role. I mean, she was really a major impetus because I had no idea. I just didn't know what I was doing. I didn't know what the opportunities were. I just took advantage of them when they presented themselves. So I took my first faculty position because I was at work one day and I was working as an acute care NP in an inpatient setting, and my beeper went off and I answered it. It was Dr. Mary Shao, and she said, "Sally, I was thinking of you. I just took a position as the program director for graduate programs, and we're starting an acute care NP track, and I want you to come develop it."
Wow.
That's it. So I didn't. It never even crossed my mind to be faculty until she reached out to me on that day.
And how was that experience for you? Was it like a great aha moment? I love this. I'm going to do this forever.
Um, no, I don't remember, honestly. I mean, I did like it. I really did like it. My hesitation isn't for that, but I remember being so stunningly overwhelmed in the very beginning of that role. In fact, Dr. Shao, she recruited me to do the acute care program, and then a former colleague of hers named Dr. Molly Rose to start the family nurse practitioner program. This was what is now Drexel University,
Yeah.
but back then it was Hahnemann University, and Hahnemann was just developing NP programs for the first time. This was brand new. So she recruited me to do the acute care and Molly to do the FMP. But Molly was an experienced teacher. And even Molly said, like in those early faculty meetings and orientation, she said, "You just looked shell shocked. You looked like a deer in the headlights, like with people were saying things and like you had no idea what they were talking about." And it's true. So I do enjoy it. I like teaching, and I've it's been really good to me, and I'm so glad I did the role. But I don't remember having an aha moment. I remember just trying to keep my head above water and stay one step ahead of the students in the very beginning.
Yeah, so let's talk about that for a second. When you transitioned from like clinical role of being an NP to this academic, faculty role, what are some of the biggest challenges that you face? And maybe even today that you feel like there's a
Oh God, yeah. What wasn't a big challenge? I mean, the first thing I will tell you, like I didn't know. I just didn't know. I mean, listen, I wasn't dumb. I was just ill-informed, like I said, I kind of fell into nursing because I needed something where I could get a job right away. I'm naturally a competitive and a high achiever. So in school, I always wanted to like do the best and be the best and all that kind of stuff. And then I finished school and I just got a job, as an RN. I took a nurse extern position, and then I went right into bedside nursing in the ICU because, of course, that was like the cool, the ICU nurses were like cooler. And so I did that. And then I just really didn't even think about being an MP until Dr. Shao
Yeah.
when she was at Rutgers, then they were starting a graduate program and they had grant funding to push students through. So she just pushed me into the MP program. I didn't, like, okay, MP, what exactly is that? And back then the role was still being very much defined. So I was only a practicing NP for, gosh, maybe 2 years before
Oh,
she called me to be a faculty member. Like it just went boom, boom, boom. I got right out of school. I took my first job as an MP was as an acute care MP before there was even an acute care MP exam. They called them tertiary MPs then, and we didn't have an exam yet. I know
wow.
the first NP acute care exam was December of 1995, and I took that because by then I was teaching. So anyway, I'm getting a field from your question. I'm just remembering to feeling like, oh my gosh, what am I doing? But
Real.
so she recruited me into this role, and she hired me, and I went to university orientation, at like faculty orientation, and like learning objectives. I didn't know what, I hadn't thought about that. As a student, you don't so much think about it. I had to write objectives and then I had to like develop lectures to align curriculum and develop mechanisms of assessment. Like I really was thoroughly overwhelmed.
Yeah.
Um, but aside from that, like the one thing, and anybody who's listening who is new to the faculty role, the one thing that is so crystal clear in retrospect is there's a big difference between a faculty role and just being a teacher. And
Mm,
I didn't know that, and nobody told me that. So I thought I was being hired to be a teacher. And I thought, okay, like I can, I do have a little bit of ability there to teach. And I figured I could do that.
yeah.
Um, but I had no idea that the faculty role was so many other things. And that's one of the first things I would say to anybody who's just getting started or anybody who's listening who's thinking about it. Being a faculty member isn't just about being a teacher. It is
Yes.
also about contributing to the university community. There will be service to the university, service to the school. It's about like whether you research or do other forms of scholarship, like those are things that you have to do. The faculty role includes teaching, that's just a given, but you also will either be a researcher or a clinical scholar. So you don't just teach, you also you're expected to contribute to scholarship in the discipline, whether you are writing articles or doing presentations about clinical issues, clinical applications, but you're expected to do all of that. And then service to the university. I mean, it is part of the faculty role. You're expected to serve on committees. And then as your level, you progress in level from instructor to assistant professor, associate professor, and full professor. You're expected at first to serve on committees and then to chair committees and then to chair higher level committees and then to contribute to service. So it might even be like a national conference committee. You serve on that or you chair that. And these are important parts of the faculty role that really matter if you want to advance in that world. It's not just about being a teacher. And maybe everybody listening knows that, but I sure didn't. I mean, I thought I was being hired to teach. And I put all my energies into teaching. And my mentor, my original mentor, she was supportive of that and she didn't push me too hard. But of course, she wasn't there forever. And then
Yeah.
when I took other roles, the biggest transition for me was I had a few different, when I was first a faculty member in the Philadelphia, South Jersey area, it was primarily with people I had known before, I had known in school. I took a faculty position at Rutgers University, back in the, mid 90s. And one of the faculty there was Dr. Lucille Joel, who some of your listeners may remember the name, maybe from a history book or something, or some of you won't. But Lucille Joel was the president of the ANA once upon a time, like a very long time ago. And she is very highly respected, full professor at Rutgers University. And Rutgers University in the world of faculty, that's a tough one. Like you have to be externally funded. You have to bring in big grant dollars to get tenure and get promoted there. And she was a full professor. And at least at the time, that was not easy to do. And I remember her telling me when they hired me. So she asked me about my research agenda, and I was like, "What? What? What's that? What's that?" And she was very real, it's very down to earth. And she said, "Look," she said, "you'll never get tenure here. You'll just never get it. So plan accordingly." plan your career accordingly. If you go into a tenure track position, and I know I'm deviating a little bit here, but it's kind of a useful piece of info for anyone who's listening. When you take a full-time position at a university that is a tenure track university or school, that awards tenure, you will either be hired into the tenure track or the non-tenured track. The non-tenured track is the teacher. Like, you just
Got
teach.
it.
You have to teach more. Your teaching load is higher. You're expected to teach more because you don't have to do those other things so much. A little bit still, but not as much of those other things to get you tenure. But a tenure track is very appealing to a new faculty member because your teaching load is lower, because you are expected to be developing yourself as an investigator or a scholar of some sort.
Wow.
But the thing about tenure is, when you go on a tenure track, it's a very defined period of time within the university system, like often 5 years, 6 years, something like that. And you need to be building a program of scholarship, and then you go up for tenure. And if you get it, great. You're there forever if you want to be. But if you don't get it, you're out. You're in your
Wow.
terminal year. You're gone. So the new faculty thinks, oh, well, if I take the non-tenure track, I don't have to teach as much. I mean, it's just as appealing, but you have to be developing that scholar role. You have to have the desire and the drive and the mindset to do it. And when Lucille Joel asked me about my research agenda, and I was like, "What? Research agenda?" If you're not even thinking that way, you will never get tenure here. So, and I was on a tenure track. She said, "So enjoy these 5 years and then plan to go elsewhere."
Wow.
And she was right.
So how did you learn all of that? Like, in the sense of, to your point, like, when now this is a new role and you have to make learning objectives, and now you have to be a researcher, and you have to do this and you have to do that and you have to do that. And that's a lot of stuff it's a big learning curve. So how did you do that? How did you accomplish, like, settling into, like, these are the things that I must know how to do?
I didn't always do it well in the beginning because things I didn't know, like
Yeah.
the learning objectives and how to develop like the learning objectives is a really important part of the faculty role. And my friend Molly, the lady that got hired with me, and my mentor, Dr. Shao, they taught me about that. For the listeners who are new to the faculty role, if you don't know what Bloom's taxonomy is, as soon as we're done, Google it, because Bloom's taxonomy, it's old and antiquated now, but it's still your friend in terms of developing learning objectives. Bloom's taxonomy really defines the verbs. Now we call them program outcomes. Every 10 years they have to change the terminology to sound contemporary, but like program outcomes or course outcomes are the artist formerly known as learning objectives. And they need to be measurable. You need to be able to demonstrate that the student has met them. And the level of the verb needs to be commensurate with the level of education. So Bloom's taxonomy describes a hierarchy of verbs, things like identify, discuss, explain. At the conclusion of this course, the student will identify the elements of SOAP note assessment, right? Identify is very basic, very prosaic. I mean, most graduate students, we want to be able to do more than just identify. Identify, you just regurgitate what you learned. But like if you're teaching like the very entry level nursing, that's very important, because entry level bedside nursing, like they have to learn like what is sterile technique.
Yeah.
Like they have to learn some very basic things. So you can, in undergrad courses, those kind of verbs are appropriate. One of the first things I ever taught was undergrad assessment. So I could use verbs like identify, discuss, demonstrate, you
Appropriate
know,
for the level.
exactly. But then as you go to teach graduate school, you expect graduate students to have higher level objectives. So things like analyze, apply, synthesize, evaluate, develop, implement, like that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And that was all new to me. I mean, it made perfect sense after I learned it, but somebody had to teach me, and thankfully somebody did teach me right up front. The other thing that it sounds so simple now, but it wasn't so simple then, is that you have to develop your objectives or your program outcomes before you can even plan a course or a class. You have to, before you decide what you're going to teach somebody and how you're going to teach it, you have to decide what they need to come out of that course with.
Yeah.
What do they need to know? And what they need to come out of the course with needs to articulate what they need to come out of the program with. And what they come out of the program with needs to articulate with the college or department outcomes, which needs to articulate with the university outcomes. Now, again, this was all Greek to me when I was a new teacher, but when the accreditation organizations come to accredit a school of nursing, that's one of the things that they look for is how does the whole thing flow? And many programs now put this in their syllabus. It's just, a student syllabus is now like 20 pages long. And
Yeah.
one of the things that it often includes is how the course outcomes articulate to the program outcomes, which articulate with the school outcomes, which articulate with the university outcomes. But you really do need to think about exactly what is it that you need to know coming out of this course. So if I'm going to teach pharmacology, what do I really think they need to know coming out of that course to contribute to their program outcome, their degree outcome? So first you have to identify what you want them to know. And then you have to identify what the essential elements are of getting there. And then you decide how you break it out um, into chunks of information that are digestible
Yeah.
and how you're going to present it. And it is a process that I just hadn't even thought about. And I've always told Mary, she gave me way too much credit because she just assumed I could figure this out. And it took a little bit more mentorship than that.
Well, you did figure it out, and that's a good thing. And you know what? I think that really does paint a very clear picture of like this is not just walking into a classroom and saying, oh, "Okay, we're going to learn about this today. Write it down. Rip out your books." Like this type of stuff. That's
And that's
exactly
just the objective part. That's just
right. Right.
objectives. Then you teach another big thing that it just didn't occur to me were methods of assessment. We as faculty are basically deciding if students can progress or not, if they can go forward and finish the program and graduate, or if they fail the course
Yeah.
and lose a big time investment of money and time, and not to mention, not getting the degree there. And it's amazing how many nursing faculty are never really taught how to develop an appropriate assessment,
And when
how
you
to
say
develop a good test.
you like, yeah, that's what you're talking about, right? Like just exams and that type of way,
Hmm.
items and writing that. Is that something that we can't assume every university, every faculty member is coming with that knowledge
Oh,
or that?
heck no. In fact, I've been, like 30 some years later, I've taught at several universities, and I've never been at a university that did a good job of teaching their faculty how to develop appropriate mechanisms of assessment. Never. I mean, my PhD is in education.
Yeah.
And that's where I even learned the significance of, hey, you don't just put together a bunch of questions
Yeah.
and questions and answers and say, oh, you didn't reach a certain threshold, you fail. Like, how do you know that that test actually measured the outcomes, measured the objectives in a fair and appropriate way? And
Yeah.
there's a whole lot more to that. And then even how you develop those mechanisms of assessment, whether you use subjective, case studies where answers are individualized and you really have to critically evaluate every one, or you use multiple choice
Yeah.
testing, which is not typically regarded as particularly great at assessing learning mastery unless it's well written. If a multiple choice test is well constructed, they can be really useful. But most faculty, I mean, if they're lucky, they get an hour-long brown bag lunch back in the old days. Now it's all distance faculty, so who's even there? But about how to write a question and develop appropriate distractors.
Yeah. So let's talk about that. Let's get into like the teaching bit of this, like the actually in front of the students in this way. You talked about things like learning objectives and assessments.
Mhm.
What are your own strategies for developing what you feel like are really good learning objectives, really good assessments that you feel like, okay, like this is valid.
At this stage of the game, just having been a practicing clinician
Yeah.
for so long, I have pretty firm ideas about what people need to know when they come out of a program. That's not to say that it always necessarily aligns with what the leadership of the school
Mm.
thinks that they should have. I mean, this is one of the reasons that I just feel like I've never, I never became a dean, never became a university provost or anything because I hold on to some of the more old-fashioned value systems in terms of what students should be taught and how they're taught it. And
Mhm.
so I'm not saying I'm right, by any means, but I have an approach that's really based in my clinical experiences. And so I have pretty firm on ideas on what I think people need to come out of a course with. And that's the way I teach it. That's the way I develop the objectives, and that's the way I teach it. And so far, when students finish school and they go on to take their boards, that's all reported back to the universities. The university tracks outcomes, they track all that kind of stuff because we have to for accreditation. And so we can see where ultimately where students might have strengths and weaknesses at the end of their program. And for the most part, I teach the hard courses. I mean, I teach what some people call the weeder courses, the things that people won't get, don't get through those and don't go forward. But those that do make it to the end of the program typically do well in those topics. Just last week, I had a student say to me in a patho course, she said, "I feel like I'm in medical school." And I said, "Believe me, not even close." Because when I did the coursework for my PhD, I started at Temple University School of Medicine. I did all the coursework for a PhD in physiology. And then I just couldn't do the dissertation because you had to basically live there. Like all the other students had no kids, no marriage, no job, no, like they just were students full
Yeah.
time, and I just couldn't do it. But I did my doctoral coursework in physiology at a medical school, and believe me when I tell you the differences in education are they're really quite different. At least they were then. But my students get just a piece of it, and it's tough. And but they do well at the end. They apply that well.
Did you take any like training or classes or workshops and like how to write an assessment, how to do this that you found helpful during your journey?
Nothing. I mean, when I actually then transitioned to do a PhD in education,
Yeah.
some of my coursework there was about mechanisms of
Ah,
assessment and assessment development. But no, I really can't say. I mean, I'm sure that there are classes out there. There certainly should be. We should probably develop one
you know?
on how to write a good multiple choice, because you do have to use multiple choice assessments. In most APRN programs, you have to be able to give feedback to people quickly because they have to be able to decide if they need to withdraw or not
Yeah,
before the withdrawal date. There's a drop dead date beyond which you cannot withdraw without losing your money. And
yeah.
sometimes without having a failing grade. And students are entitled to feedback before it gets to that point so they can decide if they're going to withdraw or not. And multiple choice tests they're graded by the platforms now. They're graded immediately. We just review them, do any item analysis. So we have to use multiple guess. Plus, most of the students are then going to go on to take a certification exam, which is multiple choice. So it's really helpful for them to get in the groove of taking multiple choice exams. But writing a good multiple choice question is really a challenge. Like, and when you don't know how to do it, you write the question, okay, you think it's a good question, and then when you have your answer choices, of course, you have the right answer. So let's say you have A, B, C, and D. Okay, A is the right answer. Now you have to write B, C, and D, which are answers that are not the right answer to the question. And it has to be not obvious. It can't be so obvious. Like, how many toes does a healthy, well-developed human infant have? 5, 6, 7, or 10. I mean, it can't be like that. So developing those distractors, developing those answers that are not the correct answer to the question without being overtly obvious, that's the thing. Many people resort to all of the above, none of the above. Um, Many will insert opposites. Like if the right answer is a common adverse effect is headache, another answer choice is headache is uncommon with this condition. Like that's the
Yeah.
way people fill stuff in when they really don't know how to write a question. And they're giveaways. And the truth is that a good multiple choice question in a nurse practitioner program, it should mimic clinical practice. And in clinical practice, there's often more than one way to approach a scenario, but there will be certain nuances of one patient encounter that makes one answer better than the other three. So like if like you might have the question says you are evaluating Mrs. Jones who started treatment with metformin 3 months ago for type 2 diabetes. She has been on 1,000 milligrams BID for the last 3 months. She is adhering to lifestyle changes and nutrition management. And today she presents for follow-up and her hemoglobin A1C is 8.4%. The NP considers. So there's lots of drugs you can add to metformin. There's several different drug classes, and any one of them might be better than the others depending upon the nuance of the question. So, like a question like that, where there's no, like, that's it, the best answer to that question would be a GLP-1 agonist, like Ozempic or one of these things that you see, on TV, because that's the best answer if you're at max metformin and you're doing everything else right and your A1C is still 8.4. You have to reduce the A1C by 1.5%. You would add a highly efficacious GLP-1 agonist. That's the drug of choice for a number of reasons.
Yeah.
But the other distractors might be a sodium glucose cotransporter or a DP4 antagonist or a sulfonylurea. You could take that same scenario and add one little piece of information to it, or make the A1C 7.4 instead of 8.4, and say she has a history of CHF. Now the sodium glucose cotransporter becomes the best answer to the question. Or if the next patient, everything's the same, except finances are a real concern, she needs an inexpensive drug, well, then the sulfonylurea. So like that's how really good multiple choice questions are presented to students. Any one of the answers could work, but one will be best in that scenario. And students struggle with that. Like students want to be able to say the other three are wrong before they accept this one is right.
Yes.
And helping them get past that is
Yeah.
that's part of what we should be doing as teachers.
No, I agree. So on that note, what do you find the most effective, when you're teaching? So thinking about like your teaching style or your teaching methods and how you're communicating with students, considering too, like there's so many different types of ways that people learn and they ingest information. What's been effective for you when you're teaching, when you're communicating with students? That has to be obviously different than the way we teach and communicate to patients. So what's that like?
Man, again, it's just we learn best the things we mess up. We
Yeah.
learn typically the best things we learn if we do something and it doesn't go well, we learn from it. I mean, listen, I'm a Socratic instructor. The Socratic method, the lecture method, I still believe in it. It comes and goes from popularity, like it's like we go through times where yes, the best way is to share your experiences and share your knowledge. And then 5 years later, it's like, no, 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 don't just tell them stuff, make them learn it themselves. And then after that, it's like, oh, we can't expect them to listen for more than 15 minutes at a time. Like the methods change over time, but I do stick with the Socratic method. I mean, I think there is something to be said from hearing something from someone who knows what they're talking about and can couch it in patient scenarios that help you take that information and see how it can actually bear out. So I do tend to be a Socratic teacher. Like even though what I teach now at Drexel is online, the meat of each weekly learning unit is a PowerPoint lecture where I'm sitting there narrating it, like just like we're talking now.
Yeah.
I present the lecture and go over it and narrate it. And there is a school of thought that says, oh, that's antiquated. We should having immersive things and use AI and use interactive stuff. And for some things in some faculty, that may be where they excel. But I just don't. I don't. I feel like if you have to really work really, really, really hard to try to make another way work, you should just come back to what works best for you. So I'm Socratic and listen, I have students that don't like it.
Yeah.
We were talking about this before we started. If every student loves you, and for new faculty, here's another little pearl of wisdom. If everybody loves you, you're not doing your job. You're just
Mm.
making people love you. Sometimes they're not going to like what you say. They're not going to like the volume of work. Sometimes they're going to think you're wrong when they argue a test question with you and you explain your rationale and they don't like it. Like that is going to happen. Of course, we like it to be the exception rather than the rule, but not everybody will like your approach. But if you develop the teaching approach that works for you, the vast majority of students will learn and will be responsive to it. And then when you get evaluations, you can weed through. Some evaluations make really good suggestions. And like, I know you were doing this, but boy, it would be really helpful if you thought about doing it that way. Or if you thought like this, or if you gave an extra test or not as many tests, or if you gave us more case studies or like that kind of thing. So I have always taken that kind of feedback and tried to build it, but mostly I'm a Socratic lecturer kind of person.
Okay.
Some
That's
would
not,
say narcissist.
that is
Well,
not the word that we were going to use.
okay, thank you.
No, well, that's interesting. That's really interesting. So how do you then, you kind of mentioned this. What's your method or what, what's your process for incorporating things that are like current? Because you have taught me for sure that like things change faster than I can blink sometimes.
Yeah,
How do you keep up with that when there's something that's
they
trying to
do.
be different and evidence-based practices change? How do you make sure that your course, your curriculum matches that?
Listen, I mean, I'll be the first one to admit, sometimes I find out something needs to be changed when a student points it out,
That's
you
true.
know? I mean, and you have to check your ego at the door, you know? Like
Yeah.
if you at graduate school, some of our students are really, they are really accomplished and or maybe practice in specialty areas, and they may have access to things that we just don't encounter in the day to day. So yep, I have had people say to me, I think it's like this, or I work in this setting and we do that, and then I'll investigate and find it out. But I mean, all we can do otherwise is just try to stay on top of. Usually when a new book comes out, faculty who teach that topic will be offered a desk copy, so they have access to the thing that's most current. Um, CE. I mean, listen, I learned about it a lot of the more current stuff by reviewing the courses that other faculty at FHEA do,
Yeah.
because they all specialize in certain things, and so when they do their updates and their presentations, as my role as the lead nurse planner, I have to review everything.
Mhm.
So, like you have a Dr. Wright who's really, she's really into the world of headache, and she stays right on top of that cutting edge. So when I review her presentations, I learn about what's new in headache. So I know not everybody can do that, but it's continuing education. I mean, all you can do is just try to stay on top of the things that are most relevant to your world, because everybody can't do everything.
Yeah, that's totally true. And I think that that's
Hmm.
great. So like thinking about like professional development. So if you're a faculty member, you want to go into, or you're NP rather, you want to be a faculty member, thinking about professional development is definitely one thing. Are there certifications that exist for NPs to become faculty members aside from getting a degree?
Well, there's not a certification just for MPs, but there is a nurse educator certification.
Okay.
There is a certified nurse educator, CNE exam. And it's not like any other certification exam you'll ever take. When I was at UNLV back in oh heck, back in the wins, I don't know, the early aughts, '05, '06, something like that. Our dean was, really advocated for that. She wanted all faculty to be certified nurse educators. So we all had to study and take the test. And it wasn't just multiple choice. Like there was an essay that had to be done. And
Oh my
it
God.
was it was challenging, yeah, but there is. It's I probably should know. I don't remember who offers that certification. It's not the classic NP organizations, not AAMP or ANCC, but there is a certified nurse educator. And if anyone's interested in that, if you just web search out CNE, not continuing nursing education, but the certified nurse educator exam.
Okay, that's really good. Now,
Hmm.
something you brought up, you talked about your mentors, and that I think is really important that you had some mentors that really kind of like ushered you into this role. So, if there's any folks now that are NPs, maybe that are thinking about going into, that faculty role, or they are in the faculty role and it's new and it's wild and there's all these things that like you have to learn. What's your advice to find a mentor or a collaborator to help them with this journey, especially if you're doing this tenure, you're going to be a researcher.
Well, first I want to clarify, she teased me in and then pushed me over the edge on my own. That's what it felt like. But no, she was awesome. So like a couple things. I mean, depending on how many nurse educators get brought into that role by their peers. Like we reach out. I've done it. In more senior faculty positions, I was a department chair, I was an associate dean. I would reach out to former students and bring them in. And so use them. If somebody brought you into the world of nursing education, use them. Like don't be afraid to knock on that door, because stuff will happen every day that you're not sure what to do. But on a more formal note, the fellows of the American Association of Nurse Practitioners, the FAANP, organization, they actually have a mentorship program. So I don't remember the dates. Like every year they accept applications for mentorship in various roles, and then they match the applicant with an appropriate mentor in the fellowship organization. And the FAA MPs are all seasoned, experienced, senior level MPs from all walks of the world: clinical practice, education, research, business, and they match them up. So there is an opportunity there to get paired with a formal mentor.
Very good. Okay, that's excellent
Mm-hmm.
to know.
Mm-hmm.
Now, something that's interesting is I'm having a meme moment. I can see a meme right now. Like before we even started, you said that you're seeing patients right after this, which leads me to ask, how are you doing both? How is that the balance between you practice clinically and you teach? You have both of these roles. So how do you find that?
Yeah, I'm not the one to ask about work-life balance because I have no life, I mean, listen, I'm single. I don't have any children at home. Um, I do work way too much. I immerse myself in it. And that's not necessarily healthy, and I wouldn't advise that to everyone. But if you're going to be an NP faculty member, you do have to maintain those clinical skills. I mean, one of the things that we all sort of cringe at the thought of being taught by someone who doesn't do it anymore. Like we all had at least one faculty in nursing school who hadn't seen a patient in years, even though they might have had a lot to share. They may have had a lot of knowledge to share. It's just different, and it really can't be contemporary. So you've got to remain clinically active. And I mean, it's hard. It's hard. It really is a challenge. I'll tell you. There's a lot of factors that go into that. And if anyone is listening who is now a practicing MP, who is planning to make that switch into a full-time nursing faculty role, one of the things that you really want to ascertain when you negotiate that position is what are the expectations of you for practice and what are the allowances for you of practice. Um, it used to be that nurse practitioners had to maintain a minimum number of clinical practice hours to keep their certification.
Oh,
And for AAMP, I believe you still do, but for ANCC, you don't. But up until fairly recently, like maybe 5 years ago, we had to have clinical practice hours. So schools of nursing had to allow us
to
to
do that.
practice so that we could do it. And I mean, I'm sure there are some schools out there that have figured out how to do it well, but I never worked at one. I mean, honestly, it was always really no disrespect to the places I practice, but the question always was, how do we work this in? Because, the school is paying you for a full-time position.
Yeah.
So they expect a full-time effort. So a full-time effort typically defined by schools of nursing isn't necessarily 9 to 5, 5 days a week. A full-time effort is usually broken down into number of credits per semester or per quarter. You're expected to teach, classically, in my experience, 12 credits. So either you teach 12 credits, or maybe you teach 9 and you get a 3-credit reduction to do research, which you're expected to do. Or if you're chairing a major committee, you might get a reduction for that, or like different things that your credit load might be reduced, but you have to do these other things. But 12 credits is considered the classic full-time workload. And if you do it well, if you teach your 12 credits and you do your service and whatever scholarship is expected of you, it's a long week. So either you practice outside of that, or you try to negotiate a faculty practice plan with the school where they reduce your workload and then you can practice 1 day a week. So maybe you only have a 9-credit responsibility and then you can practice 1 day a week. But even that is like fraught with problems, because then it's like, okay, do you get a lesser salary and you get to keep what you make as a clinician?
Yeah.
Or does the practice pay the school and then they pay your salary, but then they're having to give you benefit? Like there's that whole financial piece that's really hard. It's a
Yeah.
challenge to figure it out. And then, there are some deans, some leadership that really struggle with allowing their full-time faculty to be working elsewhere. Like they just don't like it. Um, and if you're committed to, say, to practice every Wednesday, you've got to practice on Wednesday. But if the school decides to call a meeting for something, there's a faculty meeting or a committee that you serve on is meeting that day, or like 100 things that could interfere. I mean, I've seen on numerous occasion where I have peers that are working 1 day a week, but then the school wants them to do something and they have to like reschedule all their patients at the last minute,
Oh my
which is
gosh.
not good because then you lose patients that way. Like there's a lot more nuance there than just like, oh, I'll practice 1 day a week. That'll be fine. I mean, the easiest way would be to practice on a Saturday or Sunday because then indisputably that's your off time. But then, then you're working on Saturday or Sunday when maybe that's not what you want to do. So there's not a good answer to it. I mean, I don't have a good answer to that one. If you're making a full-time salary at a university, well, you're expected to put in a full-time workload.
Yeah.
And then you have to practice elsewhere and figure out how to practice, and it's just going to be a longer week. If you don't want to do that, but you want to stay clinically active, you have to work with the university to figure out whether you work 80%, like 80, whatever the salary is, you get 80% of it, but only have to teach less so that you can work 1 weekday. But it's very convoluted and hard.
Wow. Yeah, I didn't
Mm.
think about it that way. That does sound pretty complex and difficult to maintain both of those things.
I never thought about it either until we kept trying to figure out a way to make
Yeah.
it work.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Well, before we turn to questions, and for anyone on, feel free, drop in the chat, drop in the Q&A box. We'll answer any questions you have for Dr. Miller. What would you say? Because we talked so much about the challenges in the beginning, but you've been teaching for a long time now. So what are some things or a thing that floats to the top for you as what you really enjoy the most about
That's a
faculty
good
work?
question. Yeah, that's a good question because I really, as after you say that, I realize I might be leaving the wrong impression. It's just all so
No,
hard. Listen, all jobs are hard. All
heck
work is
yeah.
challenging, but there's a lot. Yeah, there's a lot of good stuff. I mean, number one, it really is awesome to watch the light go on when they finally get it. You
Yes.
know, it's
Yes.
like I love watching people work really hard and then they get it and they're just so empowered, and they feel so awesome. And it's really nice to be able to help them with that. So there's definitely that. Um, the other thing, of course, is the profound flexibility that
Mm,
really is there. Like, yeah, it's a full-time job. And yes, there might be certain days that you have to go in, you have to go to a meeting or whatever, but on the whole, it is very flexible. You can, most places you can do the vast majority of your work from home, which means you can do it on your own schedule. You can do it nights or weekends, or if you need to be there because the plumber's coming or something, you can. I mean, you don't have to pay for gas and parking and things like that. Um, there isn't that. If you manage the time right, if you handle your time well, it really isn't like once you get past the, oh my gosh, I'm so overwhelmed by learning how to write an objective. Once you learn your job, it really isn't like in clinical practice, in a full clinical day, if you pound out a full clinical day, you very often are having to catch up on notes later in the day and stuff like that. And you don't typically have that you can schedule your week in a much more manageable way at the university level. It's just not it's not quite the same as having to see X number of patients an hour and
mhm,
respond to all the messages and the task box and the requests from the pharmacy and all that kind of stuff. So there's a lot of flexibility and of course in this very litigious world that we all live in, you don't have to go to work every day worrying about what am I going to do that could potentially have somebody file a lawsuit against me. I mean,
that's
that's not
right.
to say that it doesn't happen in education. There are sometimes if a student doesn't pass and they think they should have, they might, perhaps explore the opportunity for litigation. But I've only seen, oh my gosh, in all these years of teaching, I've only seen like one or two circumstances where a student just got a settlement from the school, really just to make it go away.
Right. Let it go away.
Yeah. But yeah, no, it is. I mean, it is. It's fun. You're independent. You can think, you can do things a lot of different ways. You can try stuff out. So there's definitely lots of pros there. Just know what you're getting into. Like know that you're not just there to be a teacher. That was probably the biggest things for me were that there's so much more to the faculty role than being a teacher. And that being a teacher isn't just getting up in front of a room or now getting in front of a camera, that there really is a science behind how you determine what your course will contain, what you want students to learn, how you will measure their outcomes. There's a lot more to teaching as well.
Yeah, and I think that's a really big takeaway because we oftentimes say faculty, teacher, professor,
Hmm.
instructor. We just kind of mishmash all the words together, and
Yep.
the what's true is about it is very different. All right. I love that. We have a Q&A open here. Got some questions. So, first one, this is a good one because it's something we didn't talk about. During my MSN work, I was recruited by my preceptor for a local college, struggling with the unknown. Yeah, Sally talked a lot about the unknown and what appears to be bad compensation.
Hmm.
Compensation. This is a good one.
Oh.
I hear a lot of different things about compensation, and that's a great thought. What appears to be bad compensation. Can you talk a little bit about the compensation for faculty and maybe faculty versus clinical, like working as an NP,
Mm.
clinical practice and faculty compensation?
So there's so much variability nationally in faculty compensation. I mean, it really, really does depend on what part of the country you live in. What you would be paid, say, as a faculty member in New York City or Boston
Yeah.
might be very different, will be very different than what you are paid as a faculty member at, in just in a less dense healthcare high cost. I don't want to like put any cities out there and say, oh, they're the inexpensive one, but you know what I'm trying to say.
Yeah.
The numbers can be extremely different. Um, and I might be a little bit out of touch with that nationally, but the thing to do is to compare first to what other schools of nursing are paying. Ask other faculty member, like in your area. There's web searches, there's things you can do. And any like state system, whether it's a state college or state university system, the salaries for every one of their employees are public. They're public disclosure. You can find it online. There's a way to Google it and you can
Yeah.
see what every single faculty member is making. So find out what's comparable in your neck of the woods. Like I can tell you at UNLV, I was at UNLV from 2001 or 2002, and then with a brief hiatus, I went to Drexel, but then came back for a while. Anyway, like for most of the time I was at UNLV, we were considered very well compensated for our area, for our geographic region, but we were teaching 3 full semesters because of the massive nursing shortage in the state. We had 3 full semesters, fall, spring, and summer. We admitted 3 times a year, and so we have very dense 12-month faculty contracts. And when we converted to 12-month faculty, they took our 9 months faculty salary and increased it by 50%. So like even back in like 2007, 2008, I think I was making 130,000 a year as an associate professor, 15 or 16 years ago, but 3 full semesters. Many faculty positions have summers off.
Yeah.
So the value, the dollar value, like the dollar amount you get paid annually will sound a lot less. If you can take summers off and just enjoy your summers off, or you can almost always pick up, summer courses and stuff to teach for extra money. But so many salaries will sound lower because it's a 9-month contract.
Mm.
So there's that to keep in mind. And then how it compares to clinical, usually it's less. Usually you're going to make a little less money. And I mean, the reason for it obviously is that you're not generating an income and that you don't have that hard and fast, have to be there 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. and then sit there and finish your notes before you're done, that kind of stuff. So historically, faculty salaries are a bit less than what they're being compensated clinically in that same geographic region. But
Mm.
faculty members, not only do they have other opportunities to enhance their income, but they're very diverse,
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
know?
And you spoke a lot about the flexibility too, which I
Mhm.
think, there's a value, right? There's a value in
Mhm.
that in and of
Mhm.
itself.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Yeah, very
Mhm.
good. All right, let's see. Laura has a comment here. I have a very interesting position where I'm practicing on a mobile mother baby van in collaboration with ASU March of Dimes Wesley Clinic. So the university pays my salary to have NP students with me on the van, as well as teaching a class. It's been an adventure figuring out the nuances of navigating all these roles and expectations. That's a lot. Wow.
It is a lot. So is that a full-time, can I see that
Yeah,
chat?
it's in
Let's
the
see.
chat. You can totally see that. I don't
Oh,
know if it's
I have
full
to put on
time,
my old
Laura.
lady
Let us
glasses.
know.
Wait a minute.
That's interesting. The university pays my salary to have NP students with me on the van. And Sally, you talked a little bit about this too, that there's these
Hmm.
workouts you can do with the
Yeah.
university. Yeah, she said it's full time,
So
12 months.
full-time 12-month contract, full-time 12-month contract. They're paying the university and the university's paying you.
Interesting.
That, I mean, that is, but see, again, hate to be a cynic here, but almost certainly the university is making something on that deal.
Mm,
But on the flip side, you have the security of the university employment and their benefit package, which is usually pretty good. Benefit
interesting.
packages at the university level are usually pretty strong. Um, but yeah, I'm sure it is. I'm sure it is an adventure figuring it out.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
it's what everybody, it's yeah, yeah, tuition for her daughter. Like, yeah, that's huge. So I mean, it's not always about the dollar amount. When you make huge dollars for a thing, there's usually a reason for it.
Yes.
And it's not always what everybody wants to do. Now, if making money is your primary goal, like if maybe you're young and you're building a life and have little children and trying to buy a home, and like if money really is the issue, well, then probably a clinical position where you pounce out patients and have a productivity bonus and stuff like that, that's probably what will draw people. But there does come a time when it's not just the dollar amount, like not the tangible, what's in my paycheck every week. And then you just have to balance what's most important.
Yeah. Yeah. She says I'm old.
I'm
Okay.
old. Yeah, I feel you.
You're not.
Right there with you. Oh, please. Hmm.
One thing that makes me think of when as you're speaking, answering this question with Laura here is, what are some of the things that, let's say, if I was going to want to be faculty and I'm going to interview at these different universities to take on this role, and maybe compensation was top of mind, that like I want to get paid the most, but that's not the case in these scenarios. What are some other things that you found or that we can think about as like, well, these are values too. Maybe vacation time, maybe this. Like, what are other things to keep in mind that's not just the dollar?
Oh man, yeah. Usually there's very liberal time off
Okay,
policies as well. Some schools do require that you take your time off in alignment with like the winter break,
right.
the summer break, things like that. The what do you call it? The spring break. We used to call it Easter break, but I know we don't call it that anymore. But there's a chunk of time. There's spring break and then there's winter break and summer, but you still typically have a very liberal time off policy. Tuition reimbursement, if like that's huge if you're in a position to take advantage of it. When I was at UNLV, my son went to UNLV, tuition free.
Oh, that's
Um,
awesome.
so there's that. When I taught at Rutgers, law school was free. So, I mean, that can be enormous for some people. And then there is lots of opportunity to do things outside that if you're doing a 9 to 5 or 8 to 5 clinical practice 5 days a week, when you're done, you're usually pretty done. I mean, you're shot out. You come home and you're like, oh, let me catch up on these notes before tomorrow. But as university faculty and School of Nursing faculty, there's a lot of opportunities for networking and doing other things like CE events, conference presentations, like all sorts of professional activities, like test development and bank development, and oh man, I can't like just consulting. When you get some experience under your belt, you may consult with other schools and with course development. If you develop an area of expertise, schools will reach out to you to consult on how they develop this course and can you review it. There's book chapters and all sorts of stuff. I mean, it doesn't happen overnight, but the opportunities are there. They're really diverse, which is what keeps it interesting. I think that's one of
Yeah.
the things probably that really appealed to me is there's always something different.
Yeah, yeah. And that's kind of like nursing in general, right? Like it's like the
Mm-hmm.
old there's always something to
Mm-hmm.
do. That's true.
Yep.
In education, there's so many different ways that you can go. That's
Yep.
fantastic. All right, let's see if we missed any questions. I don't think so. This was great. Dr. Miller, I appreciate your time on this. This was
Always a pleasure.
Yes, this is a lot of really good information. For the folks that are on, Joanna's going to drop in some other links that you might be interested in, some things that we have going on at FHEA, different podcasts and resources and all of this that you might like to engage in. Yeah, thank you. I appreciate you all for joining. And if you have questions, seriously, we always say this, but truly email us. You can
Yeah.
absolutely email us. We do get those emails. We are happy to answer things if you think about them later and you've got some questions for Dr. Miller about faculty and kind of want to get some thoughts. So we're happy to do that. Any parting words, Dr. Miller?
Well, I wish I could expostulate some great words of wisdom, but I don't. But really, I mean, it is. I think being faculty is awesome. Just understand the role. Just
Yeah.
understand the role.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I think that's fair. Awesome. Well, thank
Yep,
you
yep.
everybody for joining us. We hope that you enjoyed this and check us out next month. I actually think we're going to have Vanessa and Wendy next month doing a presentation and another webinar. So sign up, check out all the things we got going on. We'd love to see you again. Good night, everybody.
Good night.